Today was the first time I'd actually accepted the fact that all my brothers are gone.
There is a particular kind of silence that only exists in a house built for a family that used to be 5, then 4, then 3, then finally 1. That is the house Barry Gibb wakes up in every morning. Not literally the same walls. He has moved many times across 8 decades, but the same emotional architecture. A home full of memory, full of music, and mostly empty of the voices that made it feel complete. At 7 to 9 years old, Barry Gibb is the last man standing from a band that once seemed too big, too joyful, too impossibly harmonized to ever end. And yet it did end, not all at once, but brother by brother, funeral by funeral, until the group that gave the world "How Deep Is Your Love" and "Staying Alive" became something Barry alone has to carry. This is the story of how he got here, and what his life actually looks like now that the applause has quieted and the weight of being the only one left has settled in for good. Barry Allen Crompton Gibb was born on the 1st of September, 1946, on the Isle of Man, a small island in the Irish Sea that had little to do with the sound the world would later associate with him. His father, Hugh Gibb, was a working musician, a drummer who took whatever hotel and dance hall gigs he could find, and his mother, Barbara, held the household together through years of near-constant relocation. The Gibbs were not wealthy. They were not settled. They were a family that moved because moving was how they survived, chasing whatever opportunity existed just over the horizon. Before Barry turned 2, an ordinary domestic accident nearly ended his life before it began. A pot of hot tea, left within reach on a table, was pulled down by a curious toddler, and the resulting burns were severe enough to require months of hospital care. In an era before modern burn treatment and skin grafts, doctors were not confident he would survive the infection that followed. He did survive, but the experience erased itself from his conscious memory entirely. 2 years of his early childhood simply gone, remembered only through scars and through what his parents later told him. It is a strange thing to carry, proof of suffering with no attached recollection of the suffering itself. In some ways, it previewed a pattern that would define much of his life, loss that leaves a mark long after the specific pain fades from immediate memory. 2 years later, the family welcomed twins, Robin and Maurice, and Barry was no longer an only child but the eldest of what would become the core of the Bee Gees. The Gibb children grew up moving from house to house, school to school, always somewhere new, always adjusting. What stayed constant was music. It was in the house because their father played it professionally, and it became something the brothers reached for instinctively, almost as a way of creating stability the family's circumstances couldn't otherwise provide. By the mid-1950s, when the family had resettled in Manchester, Barry and his younger brothers had already formed a skiffle group, singing songs by artists like Cliff Richard and the Everly Brothers, working out harmonies by ear and repetition. They played wherever they could: cinemas, small clubs, informal talent contests for children under 15, building the kind of muscle memory that only comes from doing something over and over long before anyone is paying you to do it. Barry, as the eldest, tended to write more of the original material and take a more prominent leadership role, while Robin and Maurice filled out the sound with their own voices and instruments. In 1958, seeking a fresh start and better prospects, the Gibb family emigrated to Australia. It was not glamorous. Money was tight enough that the boys performed at a local speedway between races just to earn a little extra income. But it was in Australia that a local radio DJ took real notice of Barry's original songwriting, encouraging him to keep producing material and helping the brothers get their first real footing in the music business. By the early 1960s, they had signed with an Australian label, and by 1967 they had returned to Britain, signed with manager Robert Stigwood, and released their first international album. It didn't take long for the results to show. To Love Somebody, Massachusetts, I Started a Joke, and a run of songs built on those unmistakable 3-part harmonies started climbing charts around the world. What's often missed in the story of the Bee Gees' meteoric rise is how young the brothers actually were while carrying that pressure. Barry was still a teenager when the group started recording professionally. Robin and Maurice were even younger. They were essentially children thrust into an adult industry, expected to write hits, tour relentlessly, and manage the kind of fame that most adults never learn to handle gracefully, let alone teenagers. The closeness that made the Bee Gees' harmonies so distinctive also made the group combustible. By the late 1960s, tension over who should sing lead, whose songs should be prioritized, and who deserved more creative credit, had been building for years, fed by people around the brothers who whispered that each of them might do better on his own. In 1969, that tension boiled over during arguments about the album Odessa, and Robin left the group to pursue a solo career. For a stretch, the band that had defined a sound simply didn't exist. Barry and Maurice tried to continue as a duo. Robin released a solo album that produced one hit but didn't come close to matching what the three of them had built together. The split lasted under a year, but it mattered. It proved that even brothers who had been singing together since childhood, who had built something that looked effortless from the outside,